Hi everybody, Dion again with the Inside Sales by Design video blog. This is part 2 of our money conversation. And in part 1, as a recap for folks, we talked about 2 things. Number 1, training our brain to think about money and budget almost interchangeably. However, from the standpoint of money as a resource, right? From a business perspective, our goal is to ask our buyer, hey, walk me through your budget process, right? Walk me through your organization, how you deploy resources. Money is a resource, right? And so what does that look like? And so that was kind of our first, our money conversation part 1. And the second part of money conversation part 1 was really making sure that our own personal relationship or viewpoint on money wasn't necessarily, we weren't extrapolating that out to a conversation with our buyer, right? We need to make sure that we are grounded, we understand what we're doing, we understand the conversation we're having, that we're really, as a leader, as leading our buyer through a process, being able to have a conversation around, walk me through what this looks like for you and your organization from a buying perspective. What else we wanted to talk about was the value component, right? Where we left off with part 1 was saying, you know what, you guys, sometimes it's not even about the money. It's you know what, I have the resources, I have the means to go ahead and make this purchase, right? How many of you have a drop a drop down that says lost reason, right? Or closed lost reason. And those closed lost reasons can be everything from budget to no decision, which is even worse, to they went with a competitor, right? To we don't really know. When we lose out, there's a variety of reasons for that, right? And so a lot of times sales and sales leaders go, okay, you know what? You don't lose on price, you lose on value. So regardless of your viewpoint on that, there is a component, you guys, that when we are talking about purchasing, there is a value that isn't always talked about, which is, and if this isn't part of the conversation, it needs to be, what happens after the buyer says yes, right? So part of our buyer's mindset is, okay, if I buy whatever it is you're selling me, then what? So not only do we need to not hesitate on a money budget conversation, we also need to bring into this conversation, here's what happens after, right? So I love the show Shark Tank. I think it's fabulous. I really, really love the after the tank episodes, right? What happens after this entrepreneur gets the infusion of cash? And notice it's not just about the cash. It's about what they're going to do with it. They're going to speed up production. They're going to hire people. They're going to invest. They're going to do whatever. So we need to make sure as salespeople, we don't get dollar signs for eyeballs. What we do need to make sure we're doing is having a value-based conversation, which is, do you, buyer, need this particular service right now or product, and why? Right? I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek, and a lot of the times, you know, he dives into the why. And so, you know what? If the product or service that we're selling is a nice to have, from the seat of the buyer, we need to be very careful with that. So at the end of the day, here's an example, right? We were looking at schooling options for our kids, and one of the options that was presented was, it was outrageously expensive. And I just went, holy cow, for an elementary through high school education. This is what I would assume to pay for college. nope, no amount of value prop on the base of this particular private education institution is going to sway me. There's just no way, because I don't see the value. So my question back to all of us when we have these conversations is, number one, are we treating budget and money as a resource and not a personal attachment to it, right? Number two is, do we have a clear line of sight to what money as a resource means to us, so we are comfortable having this conversation? And then thirdly, really what we're talking about in part two here is, do we understand from our buyer's perspective their why of potentially purchasing our product or service? Because if we don't, chances are we may lose. I mean, unless your buyer's really dialed in. No pun intended on that. So what we're talking about is us as salespeople, right? Do we understand this? Do we understand these three key components? And if we don't, what can we do to get really comfortable having these conversations, really comfortable asking some of these questions? And what questions are those? So again, I leave you with these thoughts, and I leave you with some potential next steps should you choose to accept this mission. And that is sit down and ask, right? You kind of need to revisit your value props. You need to revisit why an organization would potentially buy your product or service, number one. And number two, as a salesperson, do you have clear line of sight to what the heck happens after the buyer says yes? And is that part of your conversation, right? So when you know your buyer, why they're interested and what would make them say yes, right? You guys, for me, it's really about, hey, Mrs. Mishler, you know what? At the end of the day, when you go with us, here's what you get, and here's what's going to happen when you sign with us. Thank you. Please don't make me do any more work than I'm already doing. Please don't make me decode and decipher. So if I give you my money, what happens next? Our answer from a sales seat should be, thank you so much. Here's what happens next. Here's what you can expect. We're going to make this as easy and painless as possible. So if those things aren't in place for you as a salesperson, I highly, highly, highly suggest that you sit down, take time to get really comfortable with your budget money questions, get very comfortable with your relationship with money and budget. And then thirdly, what we're talking about here in session 2 is get very comfortable with being able to talk about the value of your product or service, and get very comfortable asking questions around your value propositions, right? So, and then fifth, what happens after the yes, right? What happens on their side? What does the buyer need to do in order to be successful? If it's an implementation, you guys, those things 9 times out of 10 go sideways. So how do you deal with that? If it's a service, again, same thing, right? Like what needs to be in place to not turn the buyer journey into a, hey, I'm so excited, this was really a good process, into a goat rodeo where you're getting a bunch of phone calls and people are really upset. So insofar, sometimes we can't avoid that. However, insofar as preparation goes, this is what we want to be able to do, is be really prepared to have these conversations, resolve and be very confident in order to have these conversations and advance the initiative and advance the conversation, not only for ourselves, but for our buyer who's really interested and believes that purchasing from us can help them and help their organization. So good luck with your homework. And I'd love to hear everybody else's comments, number 1, around this topic, and number 2, what you're doing to get really comfortable with this conversation. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.